Hi guys, we're back on the layout this week and it's about time I get the track looking a bit more interesting. And before it's all ballasted, there is painting and details to add, with the help from two crabs. Who'd have thought they'd be so practical? Thank you. Before I can start spraying paint all over the place, I need to mask off anything that's already been painted. The first area for this is the platform edging. The platform itself hasn't yet been laid, so as long as I cover the edging, all is well. In terms of the track itself, it'll all be cleaned off at the end, so the tops of the rails are okay to get coated in paint for now. One part that does need protecting though is between the point blades, so it's much easier to just stuff tiny bits of tissue between them to stop the issue from the root. The last area to get masked off are the rock faces, and because of their size, it's much easier to mask it off with tissue paper. Righto, the site has been prepped and we're ready to rock and roll, with primer. This is my standard technique of using car primer in a rattle can. The track needs spraying from the back as well as the front to catch all sides. I can then fire up the airbrush, and with good old number 82 earth brown in the cup, I can give the sleepers a good base coat on which I can give birth to art. Or something that will mildly resemble track. Because I'm highly unstable at the moment, I wasted valuable modelling time doing this gun cam shot. I don't know what I was thinking. The brown is acrylic, so it's dry before I've even cleaned out the airbrush, so I can get on with a bit of depth. This starts by simply dry brushing it with light antique white. I'm following reference photos whilst I'm doing this, and it does seem apparent that the sleepers have a distinctive style of weathering on them, with a sun-bleached white colour in the centre and ends, and darker stained appearance near the rails. It doesn't actually look like rust here, so I'll dry brush this on before any ballast gets in the way. This is done with sleeper grime, which seems appropriate for grimy sleepers. I won't go into rust weathering until after ballasting as it bleeds onto the stones. So we'll stop the weathering here. For it is time to add a special little assortment of resin printed details. Well, not just yet, they all need something to sit upon. So I need to extend the sleepers coming off the point work. Plasticard is cut into a strip the same width as the sleepers on the Pico point work. These are then cut to length. They've been primed in the spray booth and now glued down into place. I use liquid poly for this as the two parts are plastic. Now they need to blend to the rest of the track work. And yes, of course it would have made more sense to have done this prior to the main track painting. But I wasn't thinking. Give me a break. Whilst I can't add rust powders, I can paint the rails themselves rusty. This is one of those jobs I actually find really therapeutic. Actually, I've enjoyed most of the jobs this week. It's been a good week for train jobs. The rails always tend to end up looking messy and too rusty until you clean the tops off, so ignore how they actually look right now. I'm also trying to paint the little rail spikes in the sleepers as well as the rails, as they'd be metal. And because there's not a huge amount of track on Nangwernal, I've been a good boy and actually painted the rear sides of the rails as well. Even though you won't ever actually see it, you know it's done. And that counts for something, doesn't it? I was lucky enough for Alec at Westcliff Works to offer to print these for me, so I'm really grateful to them for that. The first piece is the head shunt point lever, I'll just point out that these aren't generic. Alec used photos and the like to model these for me. The second is the ground frame. I'll complement this with this point rod inset by Wills. To paint up the point lever, the sleepers were once again painted to match the rest of the track work. So let's skip that and go on to the metal bit. This is a mix of brown and red to get a rusty base coat. And I'll use this to cover any metalwork on the piece. With this rusty paint still wet, I'll apply rust weathering powders, as they'll stick really well to wet paint. And hopefully add a little bit of texture as well as some colour. I really feel like the powders give you a look you can't get with paint in other methods. It brings a nice softness to the transitions. With the main rust down, I can now focus on the smaller details such as the bolt heads on the base plate. And for these, I'll use a lighter shade of rust powder. And this will give added interest to the lever. That's about it for rusty areas on the point lever, so now I can go on to actually painting the lever itself. The body needs to be black, but I didn't want it looking new. So the rust being added to the base was worked up the body of the lever. And by using a small amount of black paint, some rusty base should show through, giving it an aged look. It might not, I'm just guessing here, but I hope it does. The same goes for the white tip on the lever. I'm only going to give this a single coat of white to try and get a more worn and dull appearance. If I wanted a freshly painted look, I'd keep applying more white coats, but I don't, so I won't. The lever then gets super gel applied to the underside and can be glued down onto the layout. Good. Before the next resin piece, I thought I'd make up some of the white wooden battens between the track used as markers for clearance. These are actually made from two separate pieces, a base of plasticard and then a thinner strip of balsa wood glued across the top. These were then painted in the same style as the wooden sleepers, then white added on top in an almost dry brushing style. Well, it was like dry brushing but with more paint. So just painting, I guess. The look I'm aiming for is chipped paint. These are then glued into place, using the pen markings on the cork below. Next up is the ground frame. And after a coat of primer, this is then basically painted fully in black. And that's actually quite time consuming as it's an intricate piece with lots of detail that I don't want to break. Each lever is then picked out in the appropriate colour, the main one being blue. I am so impressed with this print, and it's something I would have never been able to make myself. The ground frame sits on top of a couple of, well, what look like plates, so I've made these up from plasticard and weathered them with rust. The ground frame can then get a couple of drops of glue on its base and then sat down onto the plates below. As this isn't connected to the trackwork like the other details, I'll use the bird's eye photo that I've got of Llangwernal to place it correctly within the scene. And whilst the glue dries on the ground frame, I'll paint up the little white markers on the platform edging. These are really important on the model because I'll actually use them when operating the layout to locate where the uncoupling magnets are, as they'll be under the stock. I'm going to hand paint the white on this detail to get an older appearance, as I feel if I was spraying it, it would look too fresh. Going back over to the ground frame, and I've opened up the point rodding kit, which has a fair amount of pieces. Obviously I only need a very minimal amount for this job, but I can see it being really useful in the future for busier standard gauge layouts. I decided that at this point it would make more sense to work back from the point to the ground frame and modify the length of the rod in there, as it would be more difficult to see. I've made a little base plate to attach the pieces to, which is then glued down on yet more elongated point sleepers, and then the rest of the detail is added. This is all then hand painted following photos I took on site. Well, a number of visits now. I just can't keep away. Might even go back this weekend. The rodding was painted with a couple of colours to try and get some sort of worn look to them. Other parts were then rusted up as per the point lever before. Looks passable, I think. I think unless you know what you're looking at, which I don't, you won't be able to pick up that I've just randomly selected parts from the wheels kit to fit in the gap. And it's all about the detail, so painting all of these pieces separately really makes them stand out from being just one big moulded piece. I'm not sure what this part's called, but I'll assume it's a box that locks the point for the siding, as it's rarely used. Anyway, I made this piece from spare plastic card and weathered it up with rust again. The last piece of resin is the buffer stop at the end. Alec produced this as one piece, which means I can't accidentally break the fine detail off, because I will given a chance. The only thing is it's looking a little bit too new, so I'll lightly file away chunks from around the edge. Resin files really well, so this didn't take much elbow grease. I started by painting up the block behind. These are virtually completely covered in foliage on the prototype, so this is just to stop it looking like grey resin if you look through the plants on the model. The main buffer stop needs to be red, so first I'll put a coat of red primer on. This will make the top coat pop when it's on. Ah, there you go, it's on now. This is actually Humbrol 220, so it's the same red as on the coaches. The whole piece is then weathered with black enamel wash. This wash is really good at acting like a pin wash and settles in the gaps, giving depth and shadow. When it's dry, I'll most likely go back and highlight the main buffer as well. This can then be glued down. I've used an all-purpose glue for this as it's like a thick gel. And I wanted to lean the buffers back a little bit. Then all I really need to do on the track now is to clean off the rail heads. I'm using an abrasive rubber for this, and yes, I know they're not great to use, but I'm only using it to strip back the layers of paint. Once this is done, I'll only be using Track Magic solution to clean the track to minimise the scratches on the railheads. Well, so that's the track looking more like track. Okay, well it doesn't look like much yet, but when it's partnered with weathered ballast and dead leaf materials over the top, it should look the part. And as I said before, I can't apply rust powders until after ballasting. And that step really will bring it to life. So you'll just need to wait for that one. It's all a process, isn't it? Finally, I'm running Tom Rolt at the end of this session just to double check that the track work, or more specifically, the point work, is happy with the paint and the cleaning steps. Which it seems to be, so full steam ahead I say. Cheers.